Now, I ain't no spring chick when it comes to whipping a skid and busting out track stand. I've been riding fixed gear ever since I was 16 years old, and now I'm 28 years old. I've been on the fixed gear bike and riding fixed gears as my only bike for the past 12 years, which is an insane thing to say. And once you start to get more advanced in age, the years really do start to creep up on you, and I have seen a lot of fixed gear trends in my time of riding fixed gear, and a lot of fixed gear bikes that have come and gone. Here are 6 fixed gear bikes that time may have forgotten, but I sure as hell didn't. And speaking of fixed gear bikes that time has not forgotten, this video is sponsored by Wabi Cycles. They say that the true test of a product, or even just an idea, is that if it can withstand the test of time. And Wabi has been around in the fixed gear scene and making pretty much these same fixed gear bikes since 2009, because you don't really have to innovate or change anything if you get it right. Stick around to the end of the video to learn what makes Wabi so special. Do you guys remember Colossi bikes? Colossi was primarily a fixed gear company, and they were founded by a former pro bike racer from the Netherlands, and they had a factory in Shanghai, China, or so they say. They were known as the high quality made in China fixed gears, and they usually came up when somebody said, oh, made in China bikes are crap. But then people would say, no, look at Colossi bikes, those are fantastic bikes, especially for the price. And the special thing that they were doing is most, if not all, of their bikes were made out of Columbus tubing, and they had a whole range of Columbus tubing bikes, some of it made in China, some of it made in Italy, Columbus tubing, all for a very affordable price in the early 2010s, which was unprecedented. And heck, even here we are in the mid-2020s, and that is still an unprecedented thing, unless of course you're Wabi Cycles and you have the Wabi Lightning, which is a Columbus Spirit tubing bike. But Colossi was a complete mystery. There wasn't a whole lot of information surrounding them. There weren't any Colossi dealers in the United States, or they would get a Colossi dealer like Retrogression, and then they would get dropped. It was hard and confusing, or even just outright impossible, to place an order with Colossi as a customer. People didn't know whether they were from Italy, somewhere else in Europe, whether they were just a Chinese company with this European facade. And honestly, I really couldn't tell you the truth about Colossi. Online, the conversation surrounding Colossi only became murkier. Like, on the forums, people would have trouble placing an order with Colossi. Other people would say, oh, I placed an order and got my frame set in 2-3 weeks time. It was not a big deal. And even more other people were saying, there is nowhere to place an order on the Colossi website. There's no contact. I don't know what the heck and how the heck to get these people my money and get this amazing bike for this price. And then even other people said, like, no, you got to email them directly on this website. And it's just a whole mess of whether you could actually get a bike from them or not, and it's just all very mysterious. There was a lot of conflicting information surrounding Colossi, how to get their bikes, where they're made, where they're from, but every time that somebody posted a picture on bike forums, which was the place to talk about fixed gear bikes in the early 2010s and early 2000s, it would just reignite that spark of interest where people wanted to frickin' buy Colossis because they were really great Columbus tubing bikes and really well built and really sick looking for the price. In all of my years of riding fixed gear and the thousands of fixed gear bikes that I have laid eyes upon, I have only ever seen one Colossi bike in person. That's it. Seeing a Colossi in person is like seeing Sasquatch. It's like, oh my gosh, I heard the stories, but I didn't know that they exist. It's so strange because if you look at bikeforums.net in the early 2010s, lots of people were talking about Colossis and how to get them and how great they are for the price. And a lot of people really wanting to buy Colossis, and then only a very tiny fraction, a very tiny handful of people that were actually riding Colossi frame sets. The only Colossi that I've seen in person was a Taiwanese rider's Colossi Low Pro. And who knows how he got it. Maybe his uncle works at the factory or something. Colossi also made the Colossi Mondial Track, which is the one that I lusted after when I was a broke high schooler, which is made out of Italian-made Columbus Zona tubing and has lugs, like straight up super classy. And perhaps most famously, there's the Colossi Al Colazione, whatever. Are they Italian? I don't know. Was referred to as the poor man's Cannondale track. But just seeing how rare Colossies are these days, I would wager that it's harder to find the knockoff Cannondale track, Colossi's version, than it is an actual Cannondale track. I've seen more real Cannondale tracks than the knockoff. Colossi also did custom finishes and completely custom frame sets, or so the story goes. Now, the website says that all of Colossi's are custom and hand-built in the Netherlands with the founder's son. Or so they say. I've yet to see one of them. Although the Colossi branded Colossi's were really hard to get your hands on, it seemed that other businesses who wanted to rebrand Colossi's didn't have as hard of a time getting their hands on them and reselling them. And there were 3 rebranded Colossi's that come off the top of my head in particular, which are Heavy Pedal, Supreme Bikes, and Factory 5. Straight up, there seems to be more rebranded Colossi's than there are just straight up Colossi's, as strange as that is. So Heavy Pedal took the Colossi Al Colazione, which was the heavily inspired by the Cannondale track. They put their own wacky paint job on it and sold it for a reasonable price, and it was actually mildly successful because it was a decent bike for a decent price. It had pretty unique looks. Like when you see a Heavy Pedal Zephyr, you know exactly what it is immediately. And probably most importantly, people were actually able to place orders for the Heavy Pedal Zephyr, unlike the Al Colazione. And again, I've seen more Heavy Pedal Zephyrs in person than Colossi Al Colaziones. Like, they were doing something right, even if they were rebranding another company's frame set. Heavy Pedal is still a company. They're still around. They're still doing bike stuff. Instead of now of selling fixed gear parts and accessories, now they're a cycling apparel brand that seems like it is squarely targeted at fixed gear riders that now ride road bikes. And Heavy Pedal actually hit me up to do a review for like a bib and jersey, but I was like, I really appreciate the offer, but this is how I dress when I ride my bike, and I don't have any interest in riding a jersey when I ride my bike. But it's super cool to see that they're still around, that they've evolved, and now they're doing something else in the cycling world. So Supreme Bikes was a bike shop that, if I recall correctly, they were based out of Boston, and they rebranded the Colossi Low Pro, Colossi Al Colazione, and maybe some other models. They just slapped their Supreme decals on them and sold them for twice the price. But in the early 2010s, yeah, maybe it was a big deal. It's like, oh, you can get that Colossi Low Pro for half of the price directly from the company. This bike company is a ripoff. But at the same time, I don't know, could you actually get a Colossi Low Pro? Maybe that twice the price was a fair price because they could actually place an order for you. It's safe to say they're no longer in business anymore. Factory 5 was a fixed gear shop that was based out of Shanghai, which is coincidentally the same city where Colossi's factory was based out of. If the name Factory 5 rings any bells for you, it's probably because their lattice chainring from like 2015 to 2017 was super popular. It was like the lightest track chainring, and that was like their whole shtick. A lot of people liked the look of them. They came in fancy anodized colors, and because they were so light, they actually folded over on some riders. Yeah, yikes. Let the lesson show, just because you have CAD doesn't mean you're an engineer. But Factory 5 also sold a few rebranded Colossi frame sets, one of which was my dream bike at a time. They had a rebranded Colossi Mondial track that they called the F5 Pista. And the special thing that they did with the F5 Pista was that they took a blowtorch and flamed the tubings to change the color of the steel and give it these deep pearlescent tones to it. It was still one of the coolest finishes that I've ever seen on a bike, where it's just so deep and lustrous and unique. And because it's a lug frame set, they also did some fancy contrasting finishes, or even pinstriping, with the flamed tubing. Now, it might seem a little sketchy. Again, I'm no like metallurgist or bike builder, but I feel like if you were to flame a steel frame set, it might change the chemical properties of the steel a little bit. Might make it a little bit more brittle depending on how hot it gets, how fast it cools, and all that good stuff. And Factory 5 doesn't have the best, pardon the pun, track record with durability, but at the very least, it's an amazingly cool finish, and still, I would say the coolest finish that I've ever seen on a bike. And it was a rebranded Colossi. But these days, when you go to Factory 5's website, this is what greets you. So let's get some Fs in the chat for F5. A lot of us know leader bikes, and it is an understatement to say that they are legendary in the fixed gear scene and extremely important to getting people on fixed gear bikes. Leaders back in the early 2010s were colloquially known as like the beginner rider's dream fixed gear, and even when I first started riding, my dream bike was a Leader 725 with white Velocity Deep Vs, and times have certainly changed. So basically there's two eras of leader bikes, which is the previous original era under the original ownership and the modern era, which is different ownership. And so back when Leader was big under the original ownership, I was actually attending San Diego State at the time, which is where Leader Bikes is based out of. And it was actually pretty common to see like a handful of Leader bikes on every fixed gear group ride back in the mid 2010s in San Diego. Like, they were a big deal. But basically, the original ownership of Leader had to sell the company to other people because, to put it lightly, there was a lot of business drama. And among the last models under the original ownership, the Leader that a lot of us think about were the Leader Cretin and the Leader Kür. I asked Sal Lombroso, who is the original owner of Leader bikes and who is also the designer of a lot of Leader bikes, including the Leader Cretin, and this is what he had to say. The Cretin was made as a bike to help sponsor the local San Diego community group named the Cretins. It only lasted for a short period of time, and I'm grateful for the inspiration. Akamanchi, who was one of the founders of the Cretins, was a huge part of the reason why I decided to do it. His artistic qualities are amazing and he's a great guy. The geometry was a bit different from the 721 of that period. The top tube was made shorter and the bike was more square. I have personally ridden with the Cretins on a few occasions, and they host the craziest, like wackiest, rowdiest group rides that I have ever been to. They ride fast, they ride hard, and they also party hard and then ride hard some more. Every year, the Cretins raise money for charity through the AIDS Life Cycle Ride, which is a 545-mile ride that spans from San Francisco to Los Angeles, California. And yes, some of them even do it on fixed gear bikes. As for the Leader Kür, Sal says, I designed that bike after my oncologist, Dr. Andrew Lowy, who saved my life and successfully cured me from pancreatic cancer. He's also a professor at UCSD, and he's working on a cure for pancreatic cancer. So I decided to make a bike and donate part of the proceeds to his research. I also used that bike to prop up UCSD, which was also a big part of me being alive today. At the time, we only had one pursuit bike, and that was the Kagero. So I thought it would be fitting to make something more affordable and beautiful. I also wanted to make a design that mimicked a horizontal top tube while maintaining a pursuit geometry, which was the reason why I used that upside-down tube on the original model. The Leader Cretin and the Leader Kür are Leader's shortest-lived fixed-gear models, and while they are gone and time may have forgotten them, I certainly haven't. Be sure to hit the like button and subscribe button if you've gotten this far into the video. This will be a series as we take a look at the past fixed gear bikes, to look at some trends, to see where we've come from and how we've gotten to where we are today, and just reminisce about the past and see where fixed gears can go in the future. But speaking of where you should go in the future, you should stick around and listen to this message from our sponsor, Wabi Cycles. My Wabi Special is the most fun bike that I've ever ridden. The way Wabi's bikes are designed is very holistic. They look at every single thing to make sure that it gives you the best ride quality for your money as possible. Wabi's fixed gear and single speed bikes are constructed with a mostly road-like geometry that's slightly more aggressive for the preferences of us fixed gear riders, because most of us that are buying fixed gear bikes are riding them on the street anyway. And they help to bring the ride quality to life with very lively, supple Reynolds 725 or Columbus Spirit tubing. The way that these tube sets flex, they plane really nicely where it feels like the bike is giving in, it's pliable, but still springing back and giving you a responsive ride quality. Because it is steel, it's durable, it can take a beating, it can be locked up, it can be crashed. I have crashed these multiple times before, and they're totally fine. It's the most fun, most reliable daily bike that I've ever ridden. If you're interested in getting one for yourself, be sure to check out Wabi Cycles, linked in the description. And Fixie famous shoutouts to David K, Salvador Lombroso, Julian Corona, Brandon Black, Brent David, Mario Perez, Ted Antri, and Brakeless.Illini for helping to make these fixed gear videos possible through their support on Patreon. And remember that life is short, but don't make it shorter. So be sure to ride your bike every day to be reasonably dangerous.